For 6 months, no one knew her name. The instructors called her by her student ID number. Her classmates didn't bother learning it either. They all knew it by morning. For 6 months, no one knew her name. They all knew it by morning. The academy was a monument to galactic civilization, a station the size of a small moon, orbiting a dead star at the edge of neutral space. 40,000 cadets from a dozen species walked its corridors every day, each one carrying the weight of their homeworld's expectations. The architecture was built for beings who stood 8 feet tall, doorways arched high enough to accommodate Relanth horns, ceilings vaulted to give Catharin their necessary headroom. Corridors wide enough for 3 Voss to walk abreast. Everything about the place was designed to make you feel small, and for most of its inhabitants, that was the point. You were supposed to feel small. You were supposed to understand your place in the hierarchy of things. Aiko Tanaka understood her place perfectly. She was the one who sat alone. The mess hall was a cavern of bioluminescent light, the walls pulsing with a soft amber glow that shifted imperceptibly over the course of the meal cycle. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic, a combination she had learned to identify as the residue of processed protein and recycled atmosphere. The food on her tray was a gray paste that had the texture of wet sand and the taste of nothing in particular. She ate it because she needed to eat, not because she expected to enjoy it. The alien cadets around her chattered in a dozen languages, their voices a wash of sound that she had learned to filter into background noise. She had been doing that since she arrived, filtering, observing, waiting. No one looked at her. No one ever looked at her. The instructors called her by her student ID number, T-7742. It was easier for them than learning the pronunciation of a human name, and she never corrected them. She sat at the back of the lecture hall, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture still and quiet. Her eyes fixed on the holographic star maps that the instructors projected above their podiums. She took notes on a datapad that she had modified in her first week to interface with the Academy's systems, a small adjustment that no one noticed because no one checked. She answered questions only when directly addressed, and even then, she kept her responses brief and precise. She did not volunteer information. She did not raise her hand. She did not make herself visible. Her classmates didn't bother learning her name either. They didn't need to. She was the human, the anomaly, the one who had been admitted as a courtesy to a species that had only recently entered the galactic stage. The Relanth cadets walked past her in the corridors without glancing down. The Catharin instructors recorded her attendance without registering her face. The Xylari cadets, who were the closest to human in size and temperament, treated her with the polite indifference of beings who had never needed to consider whether a species smaller than them might matter. She walked the corridors alone, her boots making a deliberate and silent footfall on the polished metal floor. The walls were curved, designed to channel light in ways that disoriented the human eye, and she had learned to navigate by counting her steps and memorizing the pattern of the bioluminescent strips. In her first week, she had walked every corridor on every level during the low-power cycle, when the station was dim and quiet and no one was watching. She had mapped the maintenance tunnels, the emergency access points, the secondary command nodes that were not on the standard Academy schematics. She had done this because she was trained to, and because she had learned in 11 years of human military protocols that the most important information was always the information no one thought to hide. 11 years. She had been 11 years old when she started training, selected for the exchange program because her aptitude scores were the highest in her cohort. She had spent 5 years learning alien languages, 3 years studying xenoengineering, 2 years practicing tactical simulations against holographic opponents that were designed to be superior to anything human. She had been chosen because she was patient, because she was precise, because she understood that the galaxy did not owe her attention and that she would have to earn it. She had earned it in ways no one saw. The tactical simulation was a standard exercise, defend a stationary asset against a superior force, with limited resources and no reinforcements. The instructor, a Rylanth named Commander Veth, had set the parameters to reflect a scenario that the Academy considered impossible to survive. The cadets in the lecture hall had spent an hour debating strategies, each one more elaborate than the last, each one assuming that the asset could be saved through force of will and tactical brilliance. Aiko had listened to every proposal, noted every flaw, and waited. When Commander Veth opened the floor for final comments, she raised her hand, It was the first time she had done so in 6 months. The instructor looked at her with the mild surprise of someone who had forgotten she existed. T-7742. She stood, her hands still clasped behind her back, her voice calm and precise. The defensive perimeter has a blind spot at grid coordinate 7 Alpha Niner. The sensor array in that sector was decommissioned during the station's last refit and has not been replaced. A boarding party entering through that corridor would have unopposed access to the primary command node. The room went quiet. Commander Veth studied his datapad, his black eyes scanning the schematics. He found the blind spot. He confirmed it. He looked up at her with an expression that was not quite respect but was no longer dismissal. "Noted," he said. "The record will be updated." He moved on to the next topic. The other cadets returned to their debates. No one looked at her. No one asked her name. She sat back down and resumed her watching. That was 3 weeks ago. She had filed 22 formal objections to the Academy's defensive protocols in the time she had been there. Each one documented, each one acknowledged, each one ignored. She had learned that the galaxy's institutions operated on a specific kind of inertia, the kind that assumed that what had always worked would continue to work, that the threats of the past were the threats of the future, that the species who had never needed to be afraid would never need to be afraid. She had learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe was certainty, and the galaxy was drowning in it. The first tremor hit the foundation, and for a moment no one moved. But she had already taken 3 steps toward the source before anyone else registered the sound. It was a low-frequency vibration, barely perceptible, the kind of thing that the alien cadets would dismiss as a systems fluctuation or a docking maneuver. But Aiko had felt it in her chest, in the same place where she had felt the vibration of hull breach simulations during her training, and she knew what it meant. She knew because she had been preparing for this moment for longer than anyone in this station had been alive, and she had learned to recognize the sound of something breaking. She stopped walking. She tilted her head. She listened. The vibration came again, stronger this time, and the bioluminescent lights flickered once before stabilizing. The alien cadets in the corridor looked at each other, confused, uncertain. No one knew what to do. No one had been trained for this. But Aiko had been trained, and she had already started moving toward the source before the first explosion breached the outer wall. She did not look back. She did not need to. The silence behind her was confirmation enough that they were following. The maintenance tunnels were not designed for beings of her stature. The ceilings arched high overhead, built for Rylanth, who stood nearly 8 feet tall. And the ambient lighting was a dim amber that cast no shadows she could use for reference. She had walked these corridors at night during her first week, when the station was on low power, and the bioluminescent panels flickered at half intensity, memorizing every junction, every emergency hatch, every access panel that was not marked on the standard Academy maps. She had done it because she had been trained to, and because the galaxy had taught her that no one would give her information she did not take for herself. The vibration in her chest had not stopped. It was a low, persistent thrum that she recognized from human training simulations of kinetic impacts against hull plating, a frequency that meant something was breaching the station's outer shell. The alien cadets behind her could not feel it, or if they did, they had no framework for what it meant. They followed her because she was the only person moving with purpose in a facility that had just lost its nerve. She reached a junction and stopped, her hand rising to touch the wall panel. The interface was Rylanth standard, a series of glyphs that glowed pale blue under her fingers, and she navigated it without hesitation. The station's defensive grid schematic appeared on the small display, and she studied it for exactly 4 seconds before she saw the pattern. The Virax were using breaching tactics that were 3 centuries outdated by human standards, but they were effective against the Academy's automated defenses because those defenses had been designed to repel a different kind of threat. The Virax were not sophisticated, they were relentless, and they were inside the station now, moving through the maintenance tunnels with the single-minded purpose of something that had never been told it could fail. Marcus Chen caught up to her at the junction, his breath coming in short bursts, his face pale under the amber light. He was a second year, sharp and competent, but he had never been shot at before. His hands were shaking, and he pressed them against his thighs to still them. "What do you need?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. She was still reading the schematic, her eyes moving across the display with the methodical precision of someone who had been doing this for longer than anyone in this station knew. Then she said, "Seal the eastern corridor. Reroute emergency power to the secondary shield grid. You have 90 seconds." He did not ask why. He did not ask how. He turned and ran, his boots making sharp sounds against the metal floor, and she heard him calling out orders to the cadets he had gathered on his way down. She had chosen him because he was the only human in the station who had ever asked her a question about the defensive systems, and because he had listened to the answer. The first group of alien cadets reached her position 30 seconds later. They were Xylari, blue-skinned and wide-eyed, their forearms pressed against their chests in a gesture of distress that was universal across species. They stopped when they saw her, their large dark eyes fixed on her face, waiting. She did not tell them who she was. She told them where to go. Level 4, Junction 7. Wait for my signal. Do not engage until you hear 3 short bursts on the internal comms. They nodded and moved, their fear replaced by the simple clarity of having a direction. She watched them go, then turned back to the schematic and marked their position with a gesture that the station's system recognized as a tactical overlay. More cadets arrived. 2 Rylanth, tall and angular, their black eyes betraying nothing but their stillness told her everything. They had been trained to lead, but they had never been trained to lead in a crisis, and the gap between theory and reality was written in the rigid set of their shoulders. She gave them coordinates and watched them go. A cluster of Catharan, bronze-skinned and four-armed, their natural stoicism cracking under the weight of something they had never been prepared for. She gave them a route and a timing, and they moved. She did not count how many she sent. She did not need to. The station's internal comms were still functional, and she could hear the cadet teams reaching their positions, their voices coming through the channel in a dozen different languages, all of them asking the same question without saying it aloud. Who is this human, and why does she know what to do? The answer was simple. She had been preparing for this her entire life, and the galaxy had been preparing her without knowing it. Every dismissal, every ignored objection, every time she had been told that her species was too young, too small, too insignificant to matter. She had filed each one away, not as a grievance, but as data. She had learned the station's systems because no one taught her, and because she had learned early that the only way to be heard in a room full of giants was to be useful when they needed you most. The Vrax patrol entered the corridor adjacent to her position 70 seconds later. She heard them before she saw them, their heavy footsteps, and the distinctive hiss of their breathing apparatus echoing through the metal walls. The cadets behind her tensed, their hands going to weapons they had never fired in combat, their eyes wide in the amber light. She held up her hand, palm flat, and they stopped. She stepped into the junction alone. The Vrax were 3, their gray-green carapaces slick with moisture from the atmosphere of their homeworld, their mandibles clicking in a language that sounded like stones grinding together. They saw her and paused, their weapons rising, their confusion evident in the way they hesitated. She was small. She was unarmed. She was standing in the middle of a corridor that should have been empty. She did not give them time to decide what to do. Her hand moved to the wall panel, and she triggered the pressure differential sequence she had programmed into the station's systems during her second month, when she had spent 3 nights in this exact junction running calculations on atmospheric flow rates and emergency venting protocols. The panels behind the Vrax slid open, and the air in the corridor shifted, the pressure dropping in a controlled cascade that pulled them backward, their claws scraping against the metal floor as they were drawn into the maintenance shaft. The panels closed. The corridor was silent. She turned and walked back to the cadets, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression unchanged. "It's clear," she said. "Move to the next junction." They stared at her for a moment, their mouths open, their fear replaced by something that looked like disbelief. Then the Rylanth moved, and the others followed, and she let herself breathe for the first time in 90 seconds. The next hour was a sequence of such moments, each one building on the last. She directed cadet teams through the maintenance tunnels, sealing corridors, rerouting power, creating a defensive perimeter that the Vrax could not breach because they had never encountered a mind that thought this way. The station's automated defenses had been designed for a war of position, a slow and methodical grind that favored the defender. She fought a war of motion, of pressure differentials and emergency overrides, of small spaces and precise timing. The Rylanth cadets began to follow her orders without hesitation. The Xylari stopped asking for confirmation. The Catharen moved with a precision that surprised even themselves. The hierarchy of species and rank dissolved in the face of competence, and the beings who had ignored her for 6 months now waited for her instruction before they breathed. The command center's comm channel opened at 0347 station time, and Commander Vet's voice came through, clipped and formal, demanding to know who had taken control of the secondary defensive grid. She keyed the channel and spoke, her voice calm and precise. Cadet Aiko Tanaka, United Nations Space Command. I have assumed tactical command of the secondary grid under Emergency Protocol 7 Delta. The Vrak's advance has been halted at junctions 4, 7, and 12. I am coordinating a counterattack from the maintenance tunnels. Do you require a full status report, or shall I continue? There was a long silence on the channel. She could hear the ambient hum of the command center, the faint murmur of voices, the sound of someone breathing carefully into a microphone. Then Commander Veth said, "Continue." She did. She did not look back. She did not need to. The silence behind her was confirmation enough that they were following. The maintenance tunnels were not on any standard academy map, but Aiko had walked every one of them during her first week. She had done it at night, when the station dimmed its bioluminescent panels to a low amber glow and the corridors emptied of cadets. She had carried a small notepad and a pen, mapping the junctions by hand, because the alien data terminals required biometric access she did not have. 11 nights of silent work, 11 nights of memorizing turn angles, pressure hatch locations, emergency ladder wells that opened into sections of the station the instructors had forgotten existed. The tunnel she led them into now was narrow, built for maintenance drones rather than cadets. The Rylanth behind her had to turn sideways to fit through the gaps, their tall frames scraping against the walls. The Xylari cadet, a blue-skinned female named Thess, moved with quiet efficiency at the rear of the group, her large dark eyes scanning the darkness behind them. The Catharan, a 4-armed bronze-skinned male named Cathar, carried a damaged panel he had ripped from a wall junction, using it as a makeshift shield. Aiko did not slow down. She did not check to see if they were following. She could hear them, the scrape of boots on metal grates, the heavy breathing of species not built for confined spaces, the occasional whispered question in a language she did not need to understand. They were following because she was moving with purpose, and in a crisis, purpose is the only thing that matters. She stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels intersected. The air here was colder, carrying a faint metallic smell that she recognized from human training simulations. Atmosphere venting from a breach somewhere above. She pressed her palm against the wall panel and felt the vibration through her fingers. Slow, rhythmic, not the random tremor of structural damage. Footsteps, organized, moving in a pattern. She turned to face the group. Marcus was at the front, his face pale but his eyes focused. Behind him, the alien cadets watched her with expressions she had never seen them wear before. Not dismissal, not curiosity, but something closer to dependence. "The Vraks are using the primary transit corridors," she said. "They're moving in fire teams of 6, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire. Standard breaching tactics, 3 centuries old, but the Academy's automated defenses were designed to counter modern threats. The old tactics work because no one prepared for them." She paused. "Let the information settle. There are 3 maintenance routes that lead to the secondary command node. One is compromised. I can feel the vibration of their boots in the deck plating. The second is a straight line through an unpressurized section that requires a vacuum suit. The third is the one we're going to take." She did not wait for questions. She turned and continued down the left tunnel, her boots making no sound on the metal grates. Behind her, the cadets followed. The secondary command node was a small room buried in the station's core, accessible only through a maintenance hatch that required a specific sequence of pressure releases to open. Aiko had found it on her 3rd night of mapping. She had spent the next 2 hours learning the release sequence by feel, memorizing the order of the 8 valves that had to be turned in precise increments. She reached the hatch now and began the sequence without hesitation. The first valve, a quarter turn clockwise. The second, a half turn counterclockwise. The third, full rotation to the stop. Her hands moved with the certainty of someone who had done this 100 times, even though she had only done it once. The hatch opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, She stepped through into a room that was barely larger than a storage closet, filled with exposed wiring and a single data terminal that glowed with a faint blue light. She sat down at the terminal and began to work. The interface was Rylanth standard, designed for users with four-fingered hands and a different visual spectrum. Aiko had spent her second month at the academy learning to read the interface by mapping the glyphs to their functions, using a translation guide she had downloaded from the station's public library. She had practiced every night, running simulations on her personal tablet until the glyphs became as familiar as English. She accessed the station's defensive grid in 37 seconds. The tactical display flickered to life on the terminal screen, showing the station's layout with the Vrax positions marked in red. There were 6 boarding pods attached to the outer hull, with an estimated 40 hostiles inside the station. The Academy's automated defenses had been disabled in the first wave. The Vrax had used an electromagnetic pulse weapon that overloaded the primary grid, but the secondary grid was still functional. The Vrax had not targeted it because they did not know it existed. Aiko began rerouting power from the secondary grid to the defensive turrets in the eastern sector. Her fingers moved across the interface with a fluidity that made the Rylanth cadets behind her stare. They had never seen a human use their systems with such precision. They had never seen anyone use their systems with such precision. "Marcus," she said without turning, "I need you to take Thess and Cathar to Junction 7C. There's a manual override panel there that controls the atmosphere venting in the eastern corridor. When I give the signal, you'll open the vent sequence and hold it open for exactly 14 seconds. No longer." Marcus nodded. He did not ask how she knew the timing. He did not ask if the plan would work. He turned and left, the 2 alien cadets following without hesitation. Aiko continued working. She isolated the Vrax communications frequencies, routing them through the station's public address system so she could monitor their movements. She identified 3 vulnerabilities in their formation, gaps in their fire teams where the overlapping fields of fire did not cover. She marked them on the tactical display and began routing cadet teams to each point. The first team reached their position in 4 minutes, the second in 6, the third in 7. She waited. The Vrax patrol entered the eastern corridor at the 8-minute mark. Aiko watched them on the tactical display, their red icons moving in a perfect formation that had worked for 3 centuries. They had no idea that a human cadet had mapped their movement patterns, identified their vulnerabilities, and pre-positioned teams at every point of failure. She triggered the atmosphere vent at the 14-second mark. The Vrax patrol was caught in the pressure differential, their formation broken as they scrambled to secure their footing. The cadet team moved in, using the confusion to disable 3 of the 6 hostiles before the others could regroup. The first kill of the engagement belonged to Thess, the Xylari cadet, who had been silent and watchful in the tunnels. She used a stun lance she had taken from a damaged security station, her movements precise and economical. She had never trained for combat. She had never needed to. But when the moment came, she acted without hesitation. Aiko watched the tactical display as the Vrax patrol was neutralized. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply noted the time, the position, and the result, and moved on to the next objective. The second patrol was caught in a crossfire between 2 cadet teams. The third was disabled by a targeted power surge that overloaded their weapon systems. The fourth never made it past the main junction. Aiko had sealed the corridor using a pressure door that the Vrax had not accounted for because it was not on the standard station schematics. She had added it herself during her 5th week. A small modification to the station's internal systems, invisible to anyone who was not looking for it. She had been preparing for this moment since the day she arrived. The final Vrax ship attempted to withdraw, its boarding parties defeated, and its tactical advantage lost. Aiko watched it on the tactical display, its red icon moving away from the station at maximum speed. She considered letting it go. Then she accessed the station's point defense systems and locked on. The shot was clean. The ship went dark in a single burst of kinetic fire. Silence. Aiko sat back in the chair and removed her wire-rimmed glasses. She cleaned them with the edge of her sweater, a small human gesture that seemed impossibly mundane in the wake of what had just happened. She could feel the weight of the silence behind her. The alien cadets standing in the doorway, their eyes fixed on her, their breathing shallow. She turned. Commander Veth stood at the entrance to the command node, his black eyes fixed on the tactical display. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He had been watching her work. He had seen everything. He looked at the screen, then at her, and for the first time in 6 months, he asked her name. She told him, and he wrote it into the command log. Commander Veth studied the tactical map for a long moment. His black eyes moved across the schematic, tracing the red markers that represented Vrak's positions, the blue markers that showed the Academy's remaining functional defenses. He had been a commander for 47 years. He had served in 3 border conflicts. He had never seen a tactical assessment this complete, this precise, generated in less than 30 minutes by a cadet who had been invisible to him for 6 months. He looked up at her. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her shoulders slightly rolled forward, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the amber light from the holographic display. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the map, her dark eyes moving with the same methodical precision he had seen in veteran fleet officers. He asked the question, "Do you have a better plan?" She did not answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of what he was asking. Then she spoke, her voice calm and unhurried, as if she had been waiting for this moment since she arrived. The Vraks have 3 vulnerabilities. First, their boarding pods use magnetic clamps that require a 5-second cycle to release. If we depressurize the corridors at the right moment, the pods will be pulled off the hull before the clamps engage. Second, their communications rely on a narrow band frequency that the station's emergency beacon can override. If we broadcast a distress signal on that frequency, we can disrupt their coordination. Third, their command ship is positioned directly above the station's primary reactor vent. If we vent the reactor's coolant into that path, the thermal signature will blind their sensors for approximately 90 seconds. She paused. She adjusted her glasses with a small, precise movement. That gives us enough time to deploy 3 cadet teams to the compromised sectors and retake control of the defensive grid. Commander Veth stared at her. The other instructors in the command center stared at her. The cadets who had followed her through the maintenance tunnels stood in the doorway, their eyes wide, their breathing still uneven from the chaos they had just survived. He did not ask how she knew these things. He did not ask why she had prepared for a scenario that no one else had anticipated. He simply nodded once, a small, formal gesture of acknowledgement, and said the words that would change everything. "Show me." She moved to the terminal. Her fingers found the alien interface with the familiarity of someone who had spent months learning the system. She had. She had spent her first month walking every corridor at night when the station was on low power, memorizing the layout. She had spent her second month studying the defensive grid architecture from public schematics that no one else had bothered to read. She had spent her third month modifying standard human equipment to interface with the station's systems, modifying them in her quarters. Alone, while the galaxy went about its business, not watching, not caring. The preparation had been invisible because the galaxy had stopped watching. She pulled up a schematic of the station's ventilation system. She traced a path through the maintenance tunnels, marking the locations where the cadet teams would need to be positioned. She highlighted the reactor vent, the emergency beacon frequency, the 5-second window for the boarding pod countermeasure. She spoke without looking up. "Marcus, take a team to Junction 7. Seal the corridor, then wait for my signal. When the beacon broadcasts, you will have 90 seconds to retake the defensive node." Marcus Chen nodded. He did not hesitate. He turned and left, his boots making a sharp sound on the metal floor, his voice already calling out orders to the cadets he had gathered. She turned to the Rylanth cadets who were standing in the doorway. They were taller than her, broader, more experienced by every metric the galaxy used to measure worth. But they were looking at her the way cadets look at an instructor they trust. "You two, with me. We are going to the reactor control room." They followed. They did not ask why. They did not question the orders of a human cadet who had been invisible to them for 6 months. They followed because she had already proven that she knew what she was doing, and because the galaxy had just learned that silence is not weakness. The reactor control room was a small chamber, buried deep in the station's engineering section, accessible only through a series of maintenance shafts that no one had used in years. She had memorized the route during her first week. She had walked it at night, when the station was on low power, when the alien cadets were asleep, when no one was watching. She reached the control panel. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a piece of human engineering that she had modified in her quarters, alone, over the course of 3 months. It was a standard UNSC emergency pressure regulator designed to interface with human ship systems. She had rewired it to communicate with the station's alien architecture, using components she had ordered from the station's supply depot. Components that no one had questioned because no one had been paying attention. She connected it to the control panel. The device hummed once, then fell silent. She entered a sequence of commands, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had practiced this exact scenario 100 times in her mind. She had been preparing for this moment since she arrived. She had been preparing for this moment since she was selected for the exchange program. She had been preparing for this moment for 11 years of training in human military protocols. 11 years of learning the systems that the galaxy had forgotten. 11 years of being patient while the galaxy dismissed her species. The control panel lit up. The reactor coolant system engaged. She watched the thermal readings climb, watched the temperature rise toward the threshold she had calculated. She spoke into the comms. "Marcus, stand by. Beacon broadcast in 10 seconds. The countdown began. She did not look at the Rylanth cadets who were standing behind her, their hands clasped behind their backs, their black eyes fixed on the same readings she was watching. She did not need to. She could feel their silence, could feel the weight of their attention, could feel the shift that was happening in the room, in the station, in the galaxy. The galaxy had stopped watching humans years ago. They had assumed that humanity was small, that humanity was irrelevant, that humanity had nothing to offer the galactic community except compliance and patience. They had been wrong. The beacon broadcast. The thermal signature bloomed across the Vrak's sensors. The Vrak's command ship went blind for 90 seconds. She did not wait. She gave the order. Now. Marcus's team moved. The Rylanth cadets moved. The station's defenses came back online, sector by sector, as the cadet teams retook the compromised nodes. She watched the tactical display. The Vrak's boarding pods were pulled off the hull. Their communications went silent. Their command ship drifted, blind and vulnerable, its sensors overwhelmed by the thermal signature she had created. She gave the final order. Fire the station's primary defense grid. Target the command ship's engines. The station's guns fired. The Vrak's command ship's engines exploded. The ship went dark. The command center fell silent. The tactical display showed the Vrak's ships drifting dead in space. The station's defenses were restored. The cadet teams were reporting in, their voices steady, their missions complete. Commander Veth stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his black eyes fixed on the display. He did not speak. He did not need to. The silence was enough. She removed her wire-rimmed glasses and cleaned them with the edge of her sweater. A small, human gesture, impossibly mundane in the wake of what had just happened. The alien cadets watched her as if she had performed a miracle. She had not performed a miracle. She had done what she was trained to do. She had done what the galaxy had forgotten humans were capable of doing. Commander Veth turned to her. His voice was quiet, formal, stripped of the institutional arrogance that had defined him for 47 years. "Your name." She looked at him. Her dark eyes were calm, steady, unreadable. "Cadet Aiko Tanaka, third-year exchange student from the United Nations Space Command." He nodded. He turned to the command log. He wrote her name into the record, the first time her name had been written in any official document at this academy. The Vrak's commander's ship went dark, and in the silence that followed, every being in the command center turned to look at the human who had done what their entire defense network could not. The Vrak's commander's ship went dark, and in the silence that followed, every being in the command center turned to look at the human who had done what their entire defense network could not. Commander Veth stood motionless at the central console, his elongated fingers resting on the polished obsidian surface, his black eyes fixed on the tactical display. The red markers that had represented Vrak's positions were gone. The blue markers that represented the Academy's defenses were holding. The station's automated systems were cycling back to normal operation, the emergency lighting dimming to standard illumination, as if the past 47 minutes had been nothing more than a training exercise. Aiko Tanaka removed her wire-rimmed glasses and wiped the lenses with the edge of her charcoal sweater. It was a small gesture, impossibly mundane, and every being in the room watched her do it as if she had performed a miracle. The brass compass on its thin chain caught the light as she moved, and for a moment the only sound was the soft fabric against glass. She put the glasses back on and looked at the display. "Secondary grid holding at 83%, she said. "Primary grid will need a full diagnostic before it can be brought back online. Recommend we keep the station on emergency protocols until the Vrax fleet is confirmed to have withdrawn beyond sensor range." Commander Veth did not respond immediately. He turned from the display to face her. His gray-silver uniform crisp despite the chaos, his hands clasping behind his back in a gesture that mirrored her own habitual stance. The Rylanth did not show surprise easily. Their species had been dominant for so long that surprise had become an evolutionary luxury they no longer possessed. But something shifted in his expression, a crack in the institutional certainty that had defined him for 300 years. "How did you know the grid architecture?" he asked. Aiko met his gaze without flinching. "Public schematics. The station's construction records are available in the Academy Library. File 47-Beta-12, Section 3, Subsection 9. Those schematics are 9 years out of date." "They are, but the foundational architecture hasn't changed. The upgrades were all surface level. New node housings, updated interface protocols, additional power routing. The underlying structure is the same. Once you understand the structure, you can work around the surface changes." Commander Veth's fingers tightened behind his back. "And the pressure regulator?" Aiko reached into her pocket and pulled out the small device she had used to seal the corridor. It was unremarkable, a cylinder of gray metal with a single activation switch, no larger than her palm. She held it out to him. "Standard human emergency pressure regulator. Every UNSC vessel carries them. I modified the interface to match the station's atmospheric control systems. The modifications took approximately 6 hours. 6 hours. Spread across 3 weeks. I tested each modification during low-power cycles when the system logs were being archived, rather than monitored." The room was silent. The Xylari cadet with the blue skin and large dark eyes, her name was Sarala, Aiko had learned during the evacuation, stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, her gaze fixed on the device as if it were a weapon of mass destruction. The Catharan cadets, their bronze skin gleaming under the restored lighting, had stopped their forearm gesticulations and stood frozen, their datapads held aloft like offerings. Marcus Chen leaned against the wall near the secondary command node, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. He had followed her orders without hesitation. He had sealed the eastern corridor, rerouted emergency power, and coordinated the cadet teams on the upper levels. He had done everything she asked, and he was still processing the fact that he had done it. Aiko turned to face the assembled cadets, her hands clasped behind her back in their familiar position, her shoulders rolled forward in that quiet, still posture that had made her invisible for 6 months. "The Vrax will not return tonight," she said. "Their command ship is disabled. Their boarding parties are contained. They will need at least 12 hours to regroup and reassess. That gives us time to restore full defensive capability and establish a communication relay to the nearest UNSC patrol vessel." "UNSC patrol vessel?" Commander Veth's voice carried a note of something that might have been concern. "You have UNSC assets in this sector?" "I have been in contact with the UNSC carrier Kyoto since the first tremor. Standard protocol for human exchange personnel. We maintain a secure channel for emergency extraction. I activated it when I reached the secondary command node." "You contacted your military during an active engagement without informing command authority?" "I informed you. You were in a sealed briefing room with no external communications. I made the tactical decision to proceed with available resources." Commander Veth studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, and the cadets in the room seemed to hold their breath. "You made a tactical decision," he repeated. "Yes, Commander." "And you assumed command of the station's defensive grid?" "I assumed control of the secondary command node and coordinated available personnel to address an immediate threat. I did not assume command of the station. I simply acted while command authority was unavailable." The distinction was precise. It was also, in the context of what had just happened, meaningless. She had done what needed to be done. The fact that she had done it without permission was irrelevant. The results spoke for themselves. Commander Veth turned to the tactical display. The Vrak's ships were drifting, their power signatures flickering in the sensor readouts. The station's defenses were holding. The cadets were alive. He turned back to face her. Cadet Tanaka. Yes, Commander. Your actions tonight were beyond the scope of your training. They were beyond the scope of any training this academy provides. He paused, and his voice dropped slightly. They were also correct. Aiko did not smile. She did not nod. She simply stood still, her hands clasped behind her back, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the light, the brass compass resting against her chest beneath the charcoal sweater. Thank you, Commander. The formal debrief will commence in 1 hour. I expect a full account of your actions, including the modifications to the pressure regulator and the communication protocols you established with the UNSC vessel. Yes, Commander. And Cadet Tanaka. Sir. He looked at her, and for the first time in 6 months there was no dismissal in his gaze. There was something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Your name will be entered into the Academy's permanent record. I will see to it personally. She met his eyes and held them. Thank you, Commander. The command center hummed with the quiet rhythm of restored systems. The tactical display cycled through diagnostic reports. The cadets began to move, slowly as if emerging from a trance, returning to their stations, beginning the work of recovery. Aiko Tanaka remained where she was, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture unchanged. She had spent 6 months being invisible. She had spent 6 months learning every corridor, every schematic, every weakness in the station's defenses. She had spent 6 months preparing for a moment that no one believed would come, and when it came, she had been ready. 6 months of silence, 1 morning of proof, and the galaxy would never look at a human the same way again.